Hey church, and welcome to this week's small group. Now on Sunday we learned about the unsung hero Jethro. He was an elder and Moses profited by listening to him. Today we're going to learn about some more unsung heroes who are elders, but they're unnamed. We don't know their names. But before we learn about them, we're going to have a little bit of fun in the small group. So what is said in small group stays in small group as we answer these next couple questions. Tell the group one thing that your mom or dad has done that has really annoyed you. And why did it annoy you? And what is the one piece of advice that someone gave you that you wished you would have followed but you didn't? Now, before we jump into the scriptures, I need to make sure that you understand where these scriptures actually fall. Remember King David, he was the best king that Israel had ever known. He brought the people close to God. He was a strong king. And then after him, his son was a man by the name of Solomon. And Solomon was one of the most wisest men to ever walk the face of the planet. And he was also a very strong king. But this week, we're actually going to learn about Solomon's son, Rehoboam. Now, I don't want you to get confused. There's two names that are very similar in this passage. There's Rehoboam and Jeroboam. Rehoboam is Solomon's son. He's going to be the one that we're focusing on. Jeroboam was Solomon's enemy. He was a trusted official over the labor force. And he rebelled against King Solomon, and King Solomon tried to get Jeroboam killed, and Jeroboam fled to Egypt. And this story takes place right after King Solomon dies, and they are getting ready to name Rehoboam, his son, as the new king over Israel. Now I want you to read 1 Kings chapter 12, verses 1 through 4. Imagine yourself as the new king. How did the assembly put Rehoboam into a difficult spot? And if you were in his position, what would you have done? Rehoboam was in a very difficult position because he had to be perceived as a strong king. His father and his grandfather were very strong kings, and they were also very successful. But if he was to be perceived as a weak king, well, the best case scenario would be that people would just walk all over him for the rest of his time as king. Worst case scenario, if people thought of you as a weak king, then somebody might just try to kill you and take your throne from you. And so nobody wanted to be perceived as too weak of a king, but if you were perceived as too harsh, then the people would rebel against you. Next, I want you to read 1 Kings chapter 12, verses 5 through 11. What did King Rehoboam do that was right? And how would applying these things to our lives improve our decision making? Some of the things that Rehoboam did right is he didn't try to make a decision right on the spot. He consulted, he had counselors, and he thought about it. He consulted the elders, and he also consulted the younger advisors. I think that was a good decision to get a multitude of counselors. Next, I want you to read 1 Kings chapter 12, verses 12 through 15. Now, what did Rehoboam do that was wrong? And why is it sometimes so difficult to listen to elders? I think Rehoboam rejected the elders' advice. At least he thought that he rejected their advice because he thought that they were out of touch, or maybe he didn't think that they had his best interest in mind. But I think that inside Rehoboam's heart, ultimately he rejected their advice because he didn't like their answer. He didn't like what they had to say to him. Next two questions. Is it wrong to take the advice of younger people over the advice of older people? And when is it okay to take the advice of younger people? You know, sometimes the advice of younger people can actually be better. And I think that the depending factor is on who has more experience in the field that you're looking at. If the field is social media and you want to start a business with social media, you're probably better off asking the advice of younger people. But if you're looking for advice on how to run a business, it's probably best to find an older person who has successfully run a business. Next, I want you to read 1 Kings chapter 12, verses 16 through 20. What happened to Rehoboam as a consequence for listening to the wrong advice? And what are some examples that you have seen of people listening to bad counsel? At the end of the day, the elders were Rehoboam's unsung heroes. Why do you think Rehoboam didn't recognize that? And how can we discern between good advice and bad advice? You know, I think that Rehoboam didn't recognize that the elders were his unsung heroes because they didn't tell him what he wanted to hear. I'm going to give you some advice on how to figure out if advice is good or not. Number one, almost never trust the advice that you want to hear. Most of the time, the advice that we want to hear is the wrong advice. Number two, make sure that the advice that people gives you agrees with Scripture. If somebody gives you advice that is unbiblical, then it's wrong. And number three, pray that God would give you discernment. I mean, literally, get on your knees and pray and ask Jesus for discernment. In fact, let's practice that last one. As a small group, let's close in prayer and ask God to provide you some unsung heroes that will give you some godly advice. Thank you. Have a great rest of the week, and we'll see you on Sunday.